getting an alert on your screen that you have been promoted to panelist. Please accept it if you would like to both be able to be seen on camera as well as be heard on camera. Or of course, you have the option to just type in your questions in the Q&A session on your lower icon of your screen. Hi, John, do you have a question?
I sent a question into you last week in anticipation of this. And that's all. I just was hoping you got it and you would address it.
Yeah, the question I think you had sent was about how can an individual manage the financials of the institution that somebody might go into with a large down payment.
Right, analyze those, right?
Yeah, we'll take a look at that as well. It's a good question.
Okay.
I'll share that with everyone as we go through. All right, well, I want to welcome everyone today first. So one thing you might be looking at is, why am I doing something on where will I live? Why are we looking at that? Aren't we supposed to be looking at finances and what's going on in the markets? And we do that. What I noticed over time is the finances support some things that are much more important than often the finances will show. And I think what's important about that is, where will we actually live? So to some of you, that might be another state. To some of you, that might be another senior living facility. It might be just residential apartments. It might be downsizing. There's a lot of things that go along with this, but most of the conversations we have about retirement actually have a lot to deal with, where will I live? Some of you have already made the jump from a massive home with 4 or 5 bedrooms to, even just an apartment, which is 1 or 2 bedrooms. And there's some positives and negatives that we've talked about. But what we noticed along the way in talking with myself, Ken, Zach, Mike, Ryan, and also Michael, and actually everybody in our entire firm, we have found that this is just center and dear to you. So what we wanted to do is put together a program where we can explore what it is you want to know more about. This isn't just for you, though, who's doing the living. It's also for you who are in charge of your parents. So you may have to make the decision. Some of you already made the decision for your parents because they didn't have a directive. So this is really getting to know the things we want to know before they happen, so that we can make a decision. Listen, if I am infirm, if I lose my mental capacity, if my wife passes away before me, what changes might I want? If you don't know the answers, that's okay. We're here to begin to explore those with you. So this is really meant to be a piece that is centers around the community you want to live in. Now, so when I talk about, where you want to reside, you've got a community which you live in now. It's a home. It's wherever you're living presently, but there's a community around that. So a lot of times people have this idea, well, I'm going to move to Florida because the weather's better. So what I want to just put out here is to weigh things like, is Florida really better for weather? What about community? Do you have community in Florida? Is it a bunch of people like yourself who are seeking to get away from cold elsewhere and moving down there? And one of my clients said, it's just a bunch of foreigners in Florida. There really are no Florida residents, which was quite funny. But as we go through some of the things we looked at when deciding where to live as you age, consider exploring these questions. Number 1, accessibility. Is the area easily accessible with well-maintained roads and public transportation? In the winter, Wisconsin could be a bit sketchy. However, most days it's pretty good. Proximity to loved ones. That's another big one. How close is it to friends and family? Healthcare services is something we've seen a lot of as well. When I really have healthcare issues, a lot of people vacation or they'll live in Florida in the winter, but they come back here for all their appointments throughout the year. And some have decided to move back because of that, or specializing in their primary care or geriatric care in some cases. Cost of living, is a cost of living manageable where you want to move or where you'll live? Safety, is it a safe area? What are the amenities and services? Community and social life is big. So one thing my grandfather at about 87 had a cold in the middle of winter. It was February, I remember. And that happened to attack him virally. And he really declined very quickly from a vital person growing tomatoes to doing all sorts of stuff in community, golfing all the time, to really having a very hard time. And his motivation for life just seemed to kind of drop dramatically. So it was about October that we moved him into a facility. And the facility was interesting. It wasn't like you'd think of a facility. It was more of a retirement home and community with about 40 residents. And they had 2 or 3 rooms. Each one of them had 2 or 3 rooms. It felt very, very homey. He found community there, and you could just see his spirit lift up. He found a great friend as well in Marion. And he lived a very prosperous 8.5 years, which we're fairly convinced would not have happened had he not had that community. So in this case here, it's even community and social life that really gave him a lot of meaning and a lot of purpose, as you will, when he didn't feel that living alone in his own home after my grandmother had passed away for a few years. Recreational opportunities. Are there parks, gyms, senior services? Are there sufficient services for you, such as home care, meal delivery, or transportation, or for your parents? This is, remember, climate and weather. Is it okay? Is it suitable? Is it too hot in the summer? Is it too cold in the winter? Is it suitable most of the time? What are the housing options? That's what we'll talk more about. What are the living benefits? Where might you live? As far as a senior living apartment, the traditional care facility like we've seen when you need to, or living in your home to have care done there. Long-term feasibility. So what are the, will the facility continue to meet your demands as you would increase in needs, or as you move in and out of having different needs? And also, can you afford it? So these are some of the bigger issues we've seen. And those are just some of the questions we've come up with that we're going to attempt to look at. But this is really unimportant compared to what you guys want. Now, I have one client on here who's going to have to leave in about 5 minutes. He's made the jump already. He's a great friend of ours as well as client. And his name is David Krill. David has made the jump, but instead of me telling you about it, he's had a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I want him to share that before he has to leave for an appointment at 10:15. So David, if you're on right now, if you could maybe turn off your mute and just say a few words about your move to where you have moved to. Maybe just start with
Yes. Okay.
Where you moved from and to, David.
I'm on, I think.
Yes, you are. We can hear you.
Can you hear me? But
yep.
you don't need to see me.
No, right. Yes.
Well, I have a firsthand experience in all of this. It's a very, very valuable and important question as we mature and age, and it's it's very helpful that Gentian and Chris and others have allowed to present this topic.
Thank you.
It's very, very important to many people who hit 70, 72, 75 years old. And I've done a lot of research. I moved to St. Camillus in Wauwatosa over a year ago. And I'm a single widower. I moved from Port Washington here. And all of what Chris just talked about, location, services, amenities, weather, it's all a consideration, and it's all turned out extremely positive for me. The people here find it almost like living in a 4 or 5-star hotel. Everything is available, and anything is available, including transportation and doctors and nurses and the like. And the thing that I've talked about the most in doing research for this property, my mom lived here for 15 years, so I was very, very familiar with it. I do a lot of work with the Jesuit community, Jesuit fathers, and there's 58 Jesuit priests living here in a separate building who are all in assisted living. In any event, the 5 years of research that I did in trying to figure out where I wanted to live, and this would include Florida. And here in Milwaukee, there's 5 or 6 of these premier properties, which you're probably aware of: East Castle, and which is in Mequon and downtown, and St. John's on the Lake, Harwood Place, St. Camillus, and several others. But most of them provide what's called a continued care contract. So a continued care contract is I'm living in independent apartment, come and go as I please. But if I were to become disabled in any way, or have a memory situation, the continued care contract guarantees my residence for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. My children live in Colorado and Missouri, and they're most pleased with the fact that I'm totally taken care of in terms of a residence and care for the rest of my life. It's not cheap, and you have to take into a lot of financial considerations, with which Gentian can certainly help you with. But it's an entrance fee, and then when you leave the earth, 90% of that entrance fee comes back to your estate. And I just have to say that having done the research and visited 6 or 8 lunches in these facilities with 10 or 12 residents, they all say the bottom line, number one objective they talk about is, if you're going to do something, do it before you have to do it. Right. Because when you have to do it, it becomes a very different change in your life or your spouse's life. Here at the new independent living at St. Camillus, there are about 35 or 40 couples where one or the other is disabled, but they can live in an independent living apartment if one of the spouses is able-bodied. So that's a situation that is pretty popular in the building that I live in, where one is disabled and one is able-bodied. They can live in an independent living situation. The thing that you have to take into consideration is when you do become disabled and need assisted living, skilled care, or memory care, the monthly rental or the monthly fee is certainly increased significantly for those levels of care. In any event, if you're considering something like a senior community, like the ones that I mentioned, check them out. And it's interesting too that all of these facilities, these senior communities, provide a great amount of help in terms of downsizing. What do we do with all this? How do we move from a 5-bedroom home into a 2-bedroom apartment? And there's a lot of help available and companies that specialize in helping the senior downsizing and change of living conditions. And I'm happy to answer any questions that might have surfaced during what I'm saying. I've got about 10 more minutes.
Okay, perfect, Dave. Thank you. Well, there's two things I think. Thank you for sharing. I know Dave has known the community there for quite a while. His mom lived there, so we Packer games and stuff. Mom would come over. He'd bring her back and forth from St. Camillus. But they had a massive addition there, and that's what turned it really into the 5-star hotel he's talking of, which has things like I think maybe even a bowling alley. It's got maybe golf simulators. What's interesting too is that David, I think, or one of the other residents said there's a zoo. Apparently right across the street. And sometimes it's hard to tell whether it's the residence or the zoo that's open in the, no, I'm just kidding, in the facility.
We've got name tags.
That's right. Exactly. Good. So you can. That's awesome. But Dave, I think one of the biggest things too is and you've always mentioned this. I know you've done a ton of research and you're a deep thinker on this stuff. And also he was in commercial real estate, so he knows the facilities well. There's going to be some deeper questions like from Jack, who will have questions on how do you look at the financial stability of these kind of facilities, because if they go under, what happens to you? But more importantly, I think the thing I really keyed on here is doing it before you have to, because a lot of times this has been done for people because and it's not going to be residencies like, St. Camillus. It's going to be something they can be put into because they didn't make a choice. But how important is the community that you're in there, David? I mean, you talked about that, and you lived, in your own home for, probably 8 or 10 years here. And then now you've made this decision. How has the community been effective? Has it been beneficial to you? Is it, supportive? What do you find?
The community has been very helpful, very, very welcoming. And since I grew up a short distance from here, and the schools that I went to and the homes that I've lived in, there's just a lot of acquaintances. Awesome. They're not necessarily best friends, but a lot of acquaintances. And one of the things that I enjoy the most here is there are a lot of people that I know. There's a lot of things to do, but you don't have to do everything. You can be on your own and very independent, and you don't have to feel like you're not participating in the many activities, the movies, the card clubs, the book clubs, there's just something going on just about every day, not all day, but a good part of the day. And this is very Catholic, and it's been here. It's been the Chameleon Fathers have been in this location 100 years. Wow. They started 100 years ago with a hospital, and they specialize in senior communities. It's a nonprofit. Mm-hmm. And a good question is what happens if St. Camillus organization goes bankrupt or something. And I would anticipate that it would be converted to a for-profit organization,
Mhm.
and you'd probably be able to stay where you're living. But I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it would be a big question. I don't see that happening.
Yeah. Right.
There's 168 apartments in the new building, and 135 have been sold or spoken for, and that's 1 year. And we
Wow.
hope to be we hope to be fully occupied by the end of this year. Another really interesting statistic, folks, is the population of the United States of America, of those 80 to 85 years old, that population will double in the next 5 years.
Mhm.
Double in the next 5 years. 80 to 85-year-olds will double. And that's demographics that are read all over the country, of course, and that's why these types of facilities are being developed. Down the road, as those demographics reduce and there's less senior folks, I would assume that this building or these buildings may be just converted to conventional market rate apartments with all the amenities that it has.
Right. Yeah. Because it's seriously luxury living. You'll find even over here in Mequon, we've got a Spur 16, which isn't senior directly apartments, but it filled up immediately with a lot of people who moved from bigger homes into places that they felt they just didn't want to have to, deal with all of the stuff. I mean, one big question we get is, you accumulate a lot of stuff in life. That's what Americans do. Being American means you accumulate a lot of stuff. That's the game until you realize that it's not. And then once you realize it's not, what do you do with it all? And do you store it? Because this is what I'm here to tell you. And I think you've told me and many others, your kids don't want it all. There's a few cherished pieces they might have that remember the lamp or the something that's really, but they don't want the Hummels and the stuff that, your parents left to you guys. That's a big part of the downsizing as well is leaving my life. I feel I'm so attached to all this stuff. But tell me, is there anything that you can kind of give us some color around leaving some of the stuff?
Sure. I ended up with my mother's fine china, crystal, sterling silver, Hummels. And after I moved in here, it was the only items that I really valued. My children didn't want it, so what I did was I donated it all to the foundation here, and it goes to the auction. So it was a sizable individual uh, donation, and which helped in my taxes last year.
Good point. Good
So that, I
point.
mean, it's not those kinds of things, china, crystal, sterling, silver, Hummels. I mean, it's just not anywhere near what it used to be. So that's all I had left. I had downsized from my big home
Right.
when Bonnie passed away, and then I downsized again from my Port Washington condominium into here. But again, there's a number of very sophisticated downsizing helpful companies
Yes.
come into your big home and spend a day with you and put labels on things and say this goes, this doesn't go, this goes to Goodwill. And it can be done very, very effectively and efficiently with the types of services that are available and suggested by St. John's or East Castle or there's they are very knowledgeable of these companies.
I think that's what they made basements for, just to accumulate all the stuff that you don't want to give away yet. I imagine basements are, you go to other states that they don't have basements and go, where do you put all your stuff?
Yeah.
So storage units, right? But I think
There's a
that's
lot of cartoons with the guy standing up out in front of the garage that's just mobbed and packed with stuff, and he says, "Someday this will all be yours."
yeah, exactly. Exactly. The storage business, public storage thanks us all for getting so much stuff. And
The
it's been,
public storage business has absolutely exploded. I don't know if you've noticed, but it's
yes.
all over. I mean,
Oh,
it's
yeah,
just all over the place.
absolutely. It
That's
absolutely.
where those are all the basements of the world.
Yes, exactly. That's where they all go. That's where they all go. Well, I thank you. Are there any questions for David in the scenario there? I think if there's any questions, feel free. You can type them in. You can type them in as questions for the panelists. You can type them in as questions that we should explore as well. But this is really the goal of it. And David, thank you in this case for sharing. The questions that will come from others are very important. And what I think here is your insight is extremely valuable to somebody who's on the call, who's had the same questions, might be doing this, is thinking about doing this. So it's not just those who are thinking of going into it, but those who are already there. What's the positive? What's the negative? What's the downside of it? Those are very helpful to us. So any questions from any of our other attendees or panelists? You guys from the team, any questions for David?
David, I guess you kind of answered it, but you said you were looking at different climates as well during that time, looking at Florida and others. And I know you're more familiar with this area and your mother was there, but kind of what was when you looked at Florida, how was, you're familiar with Milwaukee and that place because of your mother, but how did you look for places in Florida or look for different facilities there? Did you have contacts that you reached out to find them in Florida, or what was that process like?
Yeah, that process was with friends of mine that I've spent the last 8 winters in Florida. And I've decided not to go to Florida this year because of all of the activities and opportunities that are here in where I live. And Florida it's a wonderful place to be for the winter, but not so much the whole year. And I grew up, as I said, I went to Marquette High School, Marquette University, lived in Brookfield, lived in Wauwatosa, lived in Milwaukee, and it's just my home, and it's my roots, and those roots and family and friendships. There's much more for me here than there is or would be in Florida.
Yeah. So David, here's one question as well, came from Barb. She was wondering, how old were you when you moved?
How old? I was 79.
Yep. 79.
And I'm now 81. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good question, Barb. A lot of times what occurs here, and I think Dave, you made a great point, 80 to 85 is going to double in the next 5 years. If you go back to, there's a great book called Factfulness by Hans Rosling. I experienced this, plus Ken Dykewald does a lot of this research. The fastest percentage growing of our population is the oldest. So the fastest growing percentage of our population goes to the centurions and backward. It's exactly opposite what people think. Oh, it's got to be little kids. No, they're actually reducing the total number of little kids. But we have more healthy, mature seniors than we've ever had. And it's called Maturing of America. So I think you're right on. You go into Mequon, we've got like 13 to 14 senior living facilities here, and they're growing. And it's just kind of amazing to see that we have the appetite for all of them. Ken, is there another question?
Yeah, David, this is Ken Flannery. Thanks for sharing all the information you have so far. When you look at the services and activities and the amenities, which ones do you feel are very valuable to you, and which ones help you live your best life there at St. Camillus?
Well, the number one element here is the food. The food is absolutely outstanding. The chef has been here for 20 years. And you can go to one of 2 fine restaurants for an evening meal. The pub is open for lunch. There's a delicatessen open from 9 to 4 where you can get sandwiches or whatever. And then what I do at least 3 nights a week is you can call the dinner line and pick up your dinner at the pub anytime between 4:30 and 6:30, and you just bring it up to your apartment, put it in the microwave, and it's all set. And the food is outstanding. I had Greek pork chops last night, and and there is a food cost. Every meal that I take up to my apartment is $6.50, which is very, very reasonable. The other amenities are the gym, which I use fairly often. The swimming pool, I don't. There's mass every day at 3:30. There's a lot of just seminars and and educational uh, uh, programs that are very helpful and very interesting. Flu shots, um, all the senior needs, I would say, except going to your doctor, are pretty much satisfied. You know, it's a very well run facility, and they all are. I mean, I'm not promoting St. Camilla's over the others, because I know the others are very well established as too. But and in terms of just the indoor parking and ease of getting from my apartment to my car and going where I want to go, it's the flexibility is really helpful. And there's no, you know, it's a condominium in a way. There's no lawn to cut, no windows to walk. Oh, the fee, the monthly fee also includes cleaning my apartment once a week.
Wow.
So it includes cable and internet access and everything and anything that you can think of is pretty much included. I don't know of any really anything that's not available.
So Dave, I got to ask this question. Is there a minimum age to get in? I mean, because my daughters, I mean, 17 and 14, they could live with it, right?
That was my next question, Chris. You had me at food, but then you said gym, and then it
I
was
think
clean once a week.
I think
I'm
it's
kind of all in.
65. I think
65?
it is 65.
No,
Yeah.
that's too bad. All right, so I
Yeah.
got a few years to wait. But that's an interesting one, because I looked at this and we've talked about a lot of different living arrangements. And you know, because some people want to age in their home, they want to age in place, some want to age in a location where there's community around them, like you're talking here as well, in the center of things. Some want to be in the country where they can come into the city when they want. And just to let you know as well, David is he travels around, does all sorts of stuff as well, so he's not by any means captive there. I think the idea, now let me ask you this, David, it's kind of an interesting question, but let's go back to David at 50, about when we met, right? The
Yeah.
thought of
Right.
how vital you are at 80 and what you thought a retirement home would be. Now, you had your mom, which would be some suggestion, but I think a lot of us thought we wouldn't be as ambulatory, going out and doing as many things, as involved as you are at the age that you are. Is that a fair statement?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is a fair statement. I find that just being active, and especially at my age, is very helpful.
Yeah.
And there's, as I said before, which I really like, you can participate as much as you want, 7 or 8 hours a day. There's something going on. And there's a big theater, which I enjoy 2 or 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
There's a 2 p.m. movie, and there's a committee that selects the movies, and they're outstanding movies. We just watched African Queen. You guys don't.
Great one.
You probably don't know what that is, but
I do. I've read the book.
Humphrey Bogart and Katharine Hepburn, and it's an Academy Award. But anyway, so that's a very comfortable afternoon, and popcorn is provided. And again, you can be busy if you want, or you can be in your apartment and working and doing what you need to do in your apartment without feeling that you have to participate in anything, actually.
Outstanding. I mean, it sounds like, again, wonderful arrangement. The key for us, a lot of questions that come up are, is it expensive? Is it, and this is probably, I'm gonna give you an idea. This is toward the higher end of the range as far as
Chris, I don't mind telling you exactly
sure,
what the numbers are, because I mean it's public. You can come in and get a brochure, and it tells you my apartment, which is a large 1-bedroom apartment. It's 1,250 square feet. It's pretty big. And it's all windows, and it's granite, and it's the amenities and the walk-in shower and 2 walk-in closets. It's very big. My entrance fee was $421,000. The entrance fees here vary from about $400,000 to $600,000, depending upon the size of the apartment. Then every month, my rent is $4,000 a month. which includes everything that I mentioned. It includes internet, it includes cable TV, cleaning, $180 towards food. And so it's $4,000 a month. And then if I needed to go to assisted living, I think it's about $6,500 a month.
Yep.
If I needed nursing care, that's about $8,000 a month, and memory care is about $8,000 a month. So your funding, your initial funding of 420,000, 90% of that, 380,000, is paid back to your estate when you leave the earth, and you pay on a monthly basis. You pay the rent. Now, if I were to run out of money,
right,
which I don't think I will, that they would start using the 380 for rent. If you run out of that, you're still guaranteed of a place to live for the rest of your life with all the amenities.
So it's kind of like a long-term care. It's like a long-term care insurance policy as well.
It's exactly what it is. Yeah,
right.
That's exactly what it is. Sure.
Yeah,
so
that's super.
So
helpful.
it's and the rental, that's for a single. I think if there was two people in this apartment, I think it wouldn't increase much, maybe $500. But yeah, so it's 400, and then I get 380 back when I leave the earth, and then the monthly independent living 4,000, 6,500, 8,000, and that's all very, very well explained in a brochure that any one of these organizations would have if you were to visit.
Yeah, and one of the things so in our program, what we're looking at doing as well is not only explaining what the different choices are. Here's a high end, here's a lower end, here's something in between, but then taking a bus trip where we can get some people together to actually see the locations, maybe to St. Camillus, maybe to Newcastle, maybe to there's a medium place
Sure.
that's called in West Dallas. Just find, because the key is going to be, like you said, I think the people you find, the amenities you're looking for, what you can afford as you go through, but it's almost can be this long-term care policy paid in a different way, which is interesting.
I got to run. Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah, I know you got to run, David. Thank you for all your time. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Good luck. It's a big decision, no matter where you are, and
yes.
the fact that Gentian is providing this discussion is very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Yep. Bye-bye. So like Dave just mentioned, there's big D's and there's little D's. Decisions have two different types of D's. One is a big D. That's a big decision. This is one of those big decisions for you, for your parents, for your spouse. There's a lot of the little D's are, hey, which movie should we have? Should we have popcorn or not? Those aren't, we don't waste a lot of time on those. But when it comes to this is something. Where you live is where your memories are, where your community is, where you reside, 70 to 80% of your time. So this is a huge decision. And you've just heard of a higher end scenario. And David's been so gracious to share the numbers. And St. Camillus, I think, as well as the Protestant home, are very similar as far as that. I think Newcastle's a bit less. Newcastle's about half that as an entry fee, but we'll get some numbers on those too. But those are entry fee places. There's also places where you just pay a monthly rent. Bickford home, which is where my grandfather was a wonderful solution for him. And it basically took what he had for his railroad pension. And remember, as a railroad pension, he didn't get Social Security, plus a couple $1,000s a month for him to live there. So he sold his home and used that. But there's different levels of care in each one. But again, once you get into these, there are places where if you buy in and you run out of money, you can't be kicked out. So it's an interesting solution to some of these equations where a lot of people have homes here, and maybe not as high as we just talked about at David's entry fee, but there's other solutions just like it too. There's up in West Bend, there's several great ones. There's a Lasada, and a lot of times at Lasada they'll be you're thinking of the old facility. Now in Fort Dodge, Iowa, there was one where my great grandma was, because it was one of the only ones. There was another one that my grandmother was in. And they were very inexpensive, but it's what Medicare covered. And for the days between, the time when she was let go from the hospital and when she was there, it wasn't the best facility. It's what you would have thought of, it's just what they had. But then there's these bigger facilities they're building now that are just more. The Bickford, for example, I'll just use that because it's my experience, is there as an option as well. Now, let me step one step back. A lot of people say, I just want to consider living in my home only. And you got to look at it. Is that truly feasible? Can you live in your home? My mom lives in a condo that's one floor. It's great. It's easy to get in, easy to get out. The question is, could people provide care there? Yeah, they definitely could. But how much is that going to be? How much would that be? And I think Dave said a great thing here that maybe everybody can take, note of this. What is it that I would need to do while I can still make that decision? Or can I give my children guidance? If I can't make that decision, here's what I would like. So just a few things we can say. Now, some of that can be done in some of your estate planning as well. You can do an ethical will, which tells them, here's some things I'd want. You can put some requests in there as well. But it's a great conversation to have as well as a family, if your family are your healthcare powers of attorney or your powers of attorney, if you can no longer handle your scenario. So those are some of the things that we want to look at. And what I'd like to do here, and it's interesting, I'd rather see everybody's faces and you guys can ask questions that way. Otherwise, everybody loves being a fly on the wall where one person talks, which is pretty funny. So what I'd like to do is, Jack, you had a great question about, the cost and the feasibility. And I think it's a great one. We're going to explore that more. I know when we were at Ziegler many years ago, senior living facilities are a lot of what they financed. So I might even go back to Mark and some of the people I know there and say, well, what should I look for? Is there something that a consumer could look for? By no means are we the experts in this, meaning we're not going to know everything about it, but we want to give you a means to give you information and start the conversation, and then maybe even start you with a trip. One thing a lot of people do is they fear this decision and they just wait. I got to tell you, to anxiety and fear, the cure is often motion, doing something, talking about it, starting a list. Those are some of the big things that we'll often see. So I'm going to stop talking here for a bit, but see if there's any questions that come up. Feel free, type them in the polls, type them in the question and answer, I guess I should say. There's several different things that we can talk about here. I'm going to give about a 60-second pause so you can maybe queue up some questions if you'd like. If they don't come in, I'll just keep reading from some of the stuff that we have that hopefully we can provide for you as well. So here's our 60-second pause or gratitude. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'll wait for, a few questions to come in. And if there's not, I can show, a few different things of the Dell web as well. I can share my screen, Chris, if that makes sense, of looking at different states and different options too. Sure.
Let's give us 60 seconds, see if any questions come in. I know we've talked to a lot of you individually, but let's see. We'll just queue up some questions if they come in. Feel free to type them in. Raise your hand. I know some of you can also speak. Ashley can promote you to speaking as well.
It'd also be helpful to know if you don't have a specific question or don't know the questions to ask. It'd be helpful to know what areas you'd like us to dive deeper into or what panelists you'd like to see included as this workshop takes shape. So feel free to chime in with that insight as well. Sorry, my camera's not working for some reason, but wanted to just pop in and invite that content as well.
Whoa. There are so many questions here. I can't even, oh wait, there's none. Here's what I find out whenever I do these. I tend to ask all the questions in the first one simply because you don't know the questions to ask that you don't know, right? So there's a question that comes in here from Bill. When visiting a facility and making initial inquiries, especially about the continued care contract, how soon do we reveal our own financial resources? That's a great question. I personally would hold them close to the vest in saying that we have reasonable resources for this. We've got enough to pay for this. What happens at a lot of facilities today, and I've talked with Bill and a few others, they're actually asking for the financials pretty quickly right up front. And I think that I would try to minimize that as quickly as possible. I mean, I would not want to lead with that. I would say, here's what we have. We've got enough to do this. We want to explore this. Why would we want to be here? So they show you, I guess, if you don't have enough money or if you do have enough money, that's part of the equation, but I don't want that to be the lead. It probably should be, you shouldn't go to places that you can't afford. Like we aren't going to go, I'll stay at the Ritz, and some incredible craziness there. But this is a great question when it comes to the continued care contract. What I'd like to see in the continued care contract, and we'll get more detail on this as well, is what are the ramifications of my own financial demise if that occurred? Let's say I lived 25 years and I'd planned for 15 total dollars. How can I be assured I'm safe? And that also goes back to Jack's question about how can I discern the fiscal stability? we are going to run, and Mike has a question here too, but we are going to run into a phase here where maybe baby boomers are really beginning to inhabit a lot of the, these places as their home and living facilities. There's going to be a period of time when the baby boomers no longer walk on this earth, and we're going to have the Generation Xers, and that's a much smaller generation. And then it's another 20 years when we have the Generation Y, the millennials, the biggest generation we've ever had. So we're going to see probably a breathing in and out of this. I've already lived this one time where they built a ton of facilities, and many of them went under. That was at Ziegler when I saw a lot of stuff that they built because they built before the demand was there. Well, the demand is now here, and they're kind of behind the curve. They haven't built enough for many of the people and many of the solutions we want. There's also continuing care residential communities, which are smaller in your community, which are other choices as well. I know I'm giving you a ton of information, but hopefully when visiting a facility, I think it's a really in the initial inquiries, I would say you might want to give them a range. Tell me what it would need to be able to qualify to get in here. That way you don't waste a lot of time. It's like looking at a house that's above your price range, right? You don't want to waste a lot of your time. So I wouldn't do 5 or 6 days of exploration, then go, oh, and here's our numbers. I would say, what is the area? What kind of, assets are we looking at? Remember, include your home, because if you're moving out of your home and your home is worth 2 or 3 or 4 or 500,000, sometimes in Wisconsin, maybe 6 or 700,000, that's the down payment to a facility. But if you're in Iowa and maybe the average house is 2 or 100 or 200, it's different, right? So, Bill, hopefully that answers your questions. But that's one, Jenny, we want to get in. Let's get somebody who's an expert at these facilities or in this process to give us more on that one as well. So we'll go through that. I have Mike Mann, and I've got a question from Barb. So hold on just a second. Mike Mann, you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Chris. I guess one of my questions is, and this might have been a question for David when he was speaking. So you talked about that initial entrance, and that's basically buying your ability to get into the facility itself. But that monthly rent, my question is, does that go up, or is that contract at the very beginning? So you expect to have to pay more over time, or is that once it's set in stone, that's what you're going to pay?
It does go up a little bit over time. It's probably got an escalator clause that's very small. I haven't seen them go up tremendously, not like long-term care policies. This has just been from experience, and we can ask Dave and others this question too. But what is interesting is there's a lot of services and amenities that go with it, but I don't see a massive escalator clause, but it's a good one to ask. What could be my highest? Could it double over the next 10 years for the services that they're providing? A lot of what they're doing is using that initial lump sum. Now there's enough interest rate for that initial lump sum. Think about that, $600,000 getting 5%, that's 30 additional grand this facility gets to use for their operating expenses in a shared facility. So, but that's a great question. So let's write that one down. I'd love it. So these are the questions I want. I want to go, what else should I know? What else should I be thinking of? This is super helpful because we're going to build a great question. Then together, we're going to help each other with these decisions and look at the opportunity. Good question. Great question, Mike. Ken, I think you have your hand up. And then actually, let me go to Barb Schmitz real quick. If you have long-term care insurance, at what point would that apply in a place like San Camillus? So second thing is, when you're looking at, and I'm going to answer her question in an indirect way. When you're looking at the portion that is for rent and services, unless you need activities of daily living that you need care with, you'd probably be further along. You'd be more like the 6 or the 8,000 David was talking per month. But once to qualify for your long-term care, it doesn't really matter as much where you live. It would be more the services that they provide. So let's say that I've got a policy that pays me $5,000 a month, but I need 2 activities of the daily living to actually start the policy working. So you'd be there, you'd have those available, you'd need that care at the facility, then this would come as a stipend to pay for that $4,000, $6,000, or $8,000 a month that he was talking of as well. So you can apply wherever you are. If you have long-term care insurance, it doesn't negate it. It would just be, that would be what's paying it rather than your own estate at that point in time, until you use the benefit of that long-term care policy. That's a fantastic question, Barb. And another one that we should put in our frequently asked questions, if you have long-term care and you're at St. Camillus or Lasada or Bickford or whatever, does that negate or how would I use my long-term care insurance? Excellent question. Ken Flannery.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. In meetings, I'm hearing more and more of this is that I like to stay in my home as long as possible. Mm-hmm. And so, just what does that actually mean? Mm-hmm. What services would be needed? how much assistance would be needed? Is there remodeling that needs to be done? Is there a living family that would take place there? Is it actually skilled care, or is it just I just need help? Just with everyday activities, not necessarily, with eating it, but just need help along the way. So when I hear that, I'm just wondering, the 5 or 6 more questions that would come with, hey, if I want to stay at my home as long as possible, what does it actually mean? And what happens if you're at your home as long as possible, and all of a sudden you get to a point where you can't be in your home as long as possible? How do we navigate that?
Yeah, I'm going to say that one is an intricate topic, and I mean
Yeah.
this as I think there's three. I put this together. I'm a simplifier, so in this big question, my simplifier is very, very simple. Haha. But there's 3 different ways we look at it. One, I'd like to explore, and maybe this is a survey question for you, Ashley, so you can put it up and see what people think. So maybe do a poll. I'd like to explore living at home, living in a senior care facility. Those are probably the 2 main ones, but looking at those 2, there's a third one, which could be like
it's like a retirement community where it's not as.
Yes, like a Del Webb. So, or a retirement community. I don't want to put like Del Webb. So those 3 would be very important, because even a retirement community like Del Webb may have other services, but they're not necessarily right in your home. It's just a 55 and older senior living community that doesn't offer the services we talked about, like at San Camillus and others. But these are things I want to look at and explore. And we were going to put together overall a packet over time that for you, for others, and for your kids are available. But I think what's super important here is, what are the ups and downs? What are the pluses and minuses? What most matches me? So what I want to do here, great question once again. But I think those are probably 3 major ways that you could choose to live. Just go ahead and put up a poll. And when Ashley puts out that poll, you can vote on it. I know Jack has a question here, but as she's putting the poll together, Jack, your question.
Well, just a comment. What Mr. Krill, is it his name? Mr. Krill?
David Krill. Yep.
Yeah. What he said about doing this sooner rather than later. As you know, Chris, I was in the trust business for 35 years. The biggest mistake that I saw older people make was waiting too long to make this decision. And so from a question standpoint for you all to look at is what entrance parameters can you expect, in particular in a tiered care facility? Very often, the one of the parameters I know is you must be able to walk in on your own, under your own steam. If you can't do that, they're not going to admit you. So, but there may be others that I'm not aware of, or different degrees of that, and that's something that ought to be explored.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I think that's a great question as well. What are the entry requirements? Like with long-term care, you can't have any one of, you can't have cancer, you can't have this, you can't have that. Then you essentially won't, you can't get in, right? For instance, Lisa brought up a really good point. And I want to step back on this. While we're answering this poll, feel free to go in the poll, at home, retirement, community, senior living only. But what was long-term care to generations in the past? Because we didn't have these facilities, 100 years ago. Long-term care was when dad could no longer be, working on the farm, he was taken care of by the rest of the family. That was just part of it. And many, especially in the Spanish heritage and Mexican as well, I almost said it in Spanish, también as well. There is no, somebody goes to a home. They stay in the home you're in. In Spain, often mom, or in Italy, mom or dad or whoever's often still there as long as they live with the rest of the family. So long-term care in many places is, will I live with family? I mean, and I think Lisa brought that up. Maybe that's even a 4th category here. But so far as we're looking at our 15 responses so far, 12 out of 16 want to live at some point at home. And I say at home is an awesome one, right? Because it's where we are, where we live. And you have the idea of community. Now, I'm going to do one statement because this is what I do. I think differently oftentimes. So when you're at home, like my grandfather, and you can no longer really get out, and you don't have a lot of people that come in, how might that affect us? We thrive on human connection and relationships. So what I'd say with even at home, it may be at home forever, fantastic, but maybe it's at home for a time. And then if X, Y, or Z happens, then, right? So it's interesting. So right now it looks like about 13 of 17 are at home, or 76%, 41% in a retirement community, and 29%. It's pretty funny as I go through that. Isn't that like, it's like 175%. So 13 people were looking at that home, 7 were looking at the retirement community, because I think you can answer this in more than one case. What also happens with this is this can be at home as long as I can, retirement community if needed, and senior living only. So interesting to take a look at that. But I think that's an awesome one too. It's great to see that. Peter, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly touch on the timing that Jack and Dave both talked about. Is, one example is my grandparents at one point moved into a senior living facility, did the research ahead of time, moved in before they needed care, but also didn't move in right when they decided on the facility they wanted. The facility they moved to had a waiting list that you could pay a small fee to be on, and basically have right of first refusal whenever a unit came available until you were ready to actually make the move. So that may be an option at some of these locations if someone wanted to do their due diligence and research well ahead of the time of making the move, but just wanted to have that out of the way, that they may be able to get on a wait list to, have that option until they're ready to really take advantage of it.
It's a great point, Peter. And we have a client scenario right now who's actually going through that, where they found the place they want, they're ready, but there's actually there was an 8-person wait list. They got bumped down to 4 over the last 8 months, but they're kind of hanging in limbo because they found the spot. They're really passionate about it. They're starting to downsize, but they can't do anything about it yet. And once they're off the wait list, they'll have like 48 hours to actually sign the contract and go through. So just adding to Peter's point and Jack's point and Dave's of just working on that place and finding it early on where you want to go.
And I think the interesting thing, Jack, he has wonderful experience in the trust and the trustee world and looking at this. And he really emphasized this as well as our trust department at Raymond James now, but he was one of the pioneers of it, informing it. It's the decisions that can be made while we can are extremely important to be noted. It's not fun to talk about our own demise, but the one thing we all share is we're all, this is what Peter Diamandis said, we're all terminal diseases. I don't agree with that. We all share the same fate. So our demise is inevitable, right? Some earlier, some later. But the key is, as we are living longer and longer, this becomes a more important decision, because senior living to some was, we just, people passed away of a heart attack at, 55 at one point back in the 1940s. Today, now we're living well into our 80s in many cases. Females now are 82 on average and growing. So looking at this as well, but Jack, it's really cool. And thank you so much for bringing the ideas too about all the decisions to be made. And this also goes to trustees, trusts, putting this in a document that is legal while you still can and while you're, you got this ability, because so many decisions are made under duress. And we've seen some of those decisions. It's definitely not what somebody would have wanted. And unfortunately, when money, the number one exploitation of mature Americans is not from strangers calling you on the phone. Number one, by far, exploitation comes from family. When money's involved, unfortunately, it's just a truth. When money's involved, great kids, great brothers, sisters, great family members can do different things. So having some checks and balances in there, and this is a lot of stuff Jack's given us, but it's wonderful to have somebody with his understanding of this as well in the bigger picture. So we appreciate that, Jack, and appreciate all the input that you have and the questions you have, which are outstanding too. But this is really designed, you can see the poll as we've gotten across here, that the at home is by far the biggest retirement community of some kind. And I think as I look at this, I always thought I'd just live at home. And I view that because I view my present self as my life living at home, an ambulatory, cooking and cleaning. I could bring somebody in. But once you become the center of that, you become the quarterback of like 14 or 15 things. It's nice to get rid of some of that. One of my clients, Bob, who's just turned 80 up in Appleton, he has found that and this is, a lot of clients have done this out of the blue. They've told me after it's occurred, they've just decided to sell their home and move into something smaller. I'm like, wow, how come? Well, I've got the cottage up north, so I'll use that. And then I've just decided to move into this facility here, so I don't have to, or this apartment, so I don't have to take care of everything I did, because a lot of my life was taking care of things that aren't as important to me as when I purchased them or put them in, such as a lawn, such as, these massive gardens and stuff. Some, it grows more important. So interesting. I appreciate the poll, the sharing as well, and the questions that go with it. So I did look at this idea about initial explorations for Bill. And that was, get the information from them first. Inquire on the range of services, amenities, and importantly, the costs associated without disclosing your financial details. That's what you want to do, right? Understand the pricing model. Ask them what the pricing model is. So senior living facilities might have varying pricing structures, right? Like monthly fees, upfront costs, or a la carte services. Understanding these will also help. So what are those as well? And once you're comfortable, verifies their trustworthiness, because they've got a few facilities verify their reputations and trustworthiness before disclosing any financial information. But make sure you're comfortable and you listed it to just a couple that you actually would want to live in. But getting a price range would be very helpful before you do that. Seeking professional guidance from a financial advisor or attorney, discussing some of the implications, which we're doing now, obviously. And then during those, disclose gradually. Don't just tell them everything you have. Disclose gradually. Initially disclose only what's necessary to get an accurate cost estimate to discuss payment options with them. And then ask about financial assistance, if there's any financial discounts or assistance for veterans or anything else as well. Finalizing the deal says detailed financial disclosure will generally be necessary when you move in, so it's not avoidable. You have to do it at some point. But as you're saying here, and this is just some advice from out there from experts, which is this is a way to approach when you're looking at any facility. The 55 and older communities, we've got several clients who are in those as well. And many of them are willing to share their story with you. So if you're looking at the Del Webb, or you're looking at the things in Arizona, we've got one client, she's owned 2 or 3 different properties in the Del Webb, or in the Sun City, I should say. And she's very willing to talk to anybody about this. She's very engaging. She's great about that as well. So if you have those questions, what we're doing is assembling a team of experts around these data in simplifying, reducing the clutter. And I'd say reducing the clutter person. I think David or somebody else mentioned that. Can we just hire them to come to our house now at age 50? Because I think it's going to be super beneficial. After taking all the stuff out of 2 rooms of our house just to put in carpet, I realized, oh my goodness, we have all sorts of stuff we really don't need, but it's there. So interestingly, looking at a few of these different ideas anyway, hopefully these are so far helpful. Any other questions, any thoughts that we might want to take a look at when it comes to even like the Del Webb communities or the senior living facilities or senior care facilities? Our goal is to assemble this team around you, or team that you can use to help you make the decision. And ultimately, remember, you're the author. It's your decision. You're simply looking for different people to help you with some of the basis for some of these. I think I have, yes, Ken Flannery.
Yeah, more on the financial side of things. I've heard some questions about, Medicare, Medicaid. What does that all mean? I've seen some clients do some estate planning that basically, puts them in a Medicaid situation potentially. What does that look like? What does that mean? I guess more questions right now than answers, of course. But what does Medicare cover? What does it do? What doesn't it cover? When does it kick in? Does it kick in at home, in these retirement communities? Just that aspect around the health insurance side of things.
Yeah, just so people know, Medicare and Medicaid are 2 completely different things. I know they both start with medic, but the aid or air is a big difference. But the Medicaid, I'm not an expert in it. We'll find the expert answers on this. But Medicare does have a long-term care benefit for about 90 days. If you are in something where you need rehab, you need this, that, there is some sort of a small, very small, but it's can be rehab, can be facilitation for a very short time. Beyond that, it's you. Medicaid is when you become financially destitute and you have nothing, but you need care. In that case, from our experience, if you either make yourself poor, and right now it's about 5 years where you have to give all your money away before they can come back and claw it back for the state. They're talking about making it 7 or 10 or just lifetime. So there may not be a point where you can give money away. If there's evidence of you giving it away, the state will find it, and they will take it from who you've given it to, and they will actually put liens on your home and all if you don't have the money to pay it back. So it's ugly. But Medicaid is this: you don't have a choice. If you have Medicaid, if you aren't in a facility and you've run out of money, you are put somewhere where it's available. That could be in Sturtevant, that could be in Port Washington, that could be nowhere near your family, but you're where a Medicaid bed is available. The nice thing about having some money and making the choice ahead of time is you get to choose, and there's often continuing care at the facility that you would go into. So you'd have a choice. I want to be at this place, so I'm going to put down this amount of money, and this will help me stay in that facility because they've got a policy for it. But Medicaid, you got an ethical issue a lot of my clients have brought up. Number one, Medicaid is literally making yourself destitute and putting yourself in the poorhouse. So if you have $10 million and you give it away properly, I can qualify for you to pay for my long-term care. So that's just an ethical issue. If you're okay with that, that's your road to go down. A lot of my clients have said, I'm not. If I've got this money, I want to make sure I'm paying for it, but I'm paying in the right way, and I'm only paying what I have to, not more than I have to. It's a really, really good question. Ken will talk more about that, but there's an ethical issue when it comes to Medicaid planning. But there are a ton of people out there, and I've met some of the Medicaid planners, and this is interesting. They will do some of the craziest stuff in the world. There are some good things you can do to do Medicaid planning if you're really close to it, but there's some things that Ken and I and the team have seen that I know many of you would never want to do, and I would not want to put you at risk in the things that they're doing to qualify for it. So you got to be careful because they're going to be on the radio. Oh, look at this. You can give all your assets away and never have to pay a dime for long-term care. Well, then you don't have a dime. And you've got somebody else. You are in a facility. You have no choices. So again, you got to look at the pluses and minuses. It may sound super appealing until you really look at what it is. But Medicare is something we all get at age 65, and that's a hospitalization and care that we get. And there's a lot of ramifications with that. That doesn't play a lot into long-term care. As far as the facilities we're talking, it plays into long-term care as far as not so much facilities, but in the doctor care, the medical care. So Medicare is not a replacement for long-term care. Long-term care is where you live in a facility as well that may be above what Medicare covers. That makes some sense. No, that's just giving you some, there's by no means exhaustive, by no means a full answer, but these are some of the topics we want to cover in this as well. Any other questions?
Because I think there's a Q&A.
Yep, I got a Q&A question. Sure, let's go through it here. So what is the name of the document you mentioned in the beginning where you list your wishes? I call it an ethical will. So it's an addendum to a will. You can codicil, which is basically a technical term to add it to your will. But for instance, our living will for our daughters is an ethical will. I'm sorry, the ethical will, which we put at the beginning of our trust, is 19 pages, and it's telling anyone why we've done what we've done with our girls if they need to take care of them. So we did that when they were very young to tell them, here's why we've done this, why we've done this. But as we go further, every 2 and 3 and 5 years, we'd like to update it with now our wishes are, or we've done this because, and then it becomes more informative for them if they're going to take care of us. As we look at this ethical will, you can call it whatever you want. It could just be a preamble, like to the Constitution and others, where you're going to give people your wishes and why you've done certain things. What you'll tend to find is beneficiaries who have something like that tend to follow the wishes of the givers way more often than if they didn't have that. If you give them an idea as to why. So I want to let you know that. It's a really, really good question as well. Thanks, Rob. And Carrie, whoever had asked that one. And any other questions as we go along here? We've only got a few minutes left here, but I think it's hopefully been a really good, it's been good for us to get the questions in different forms. We'll provide more of these in a format and do kind of a FAQ, frequently asked question category. When I looked at this, I looked at some of the different things that or the greatest concerns of retirees in general, revolving around financial security, health, and maintaining a good quality of life. And here's kind of a brief description. Number one, financial security, outliving savings. Market volatility. These are things that worry them when it comes to health and healthcare costs, rising healthcare costs and long-term care. Both can play into this equation, right? When it came to number three, social and emotional well-being, isolation and loneliness. I just read a huge study on this. It's called the nothingness syndrome. And it often happens to retirees, pre-retirement and post-retirement. And that is having nothing really to be building toward or looking forward to. And they believe they get this syndrome where it's just stuck. I'm not important to anyone. That can easily be thwarted when we go back and appreciate and look at your skills, your experiences, who you give things to, and how you fit into. There's a lot of stuff that can go along with that, but that's a big one. Isolation and loneliness, boredom and lack of purpose was another one for social and emotional well-being. Inflation, the concern with that. Estate and legacy planning, that's ensuring obviously that everything we've just talked about is actually happening. To say, I want to go into this facility, but your kids decide you should go somewhere else. If it's not in a trust, if it's not in a document, not in your wishes, it may not be carried out the way you'd hope it would. Tax burden. People are worried about tax burden, managing taxes efficiently. And then policy changes. There can be big policy changes. Those were some of the biggest concerns that they had. And I just wanted to make sure that, again, across this was one of those concerns. And I think as we began the initial maybe 12 or 14 things that we had, we'll put these in documents that you can take a look at. You can see. But this is really an exploration of, for me, what might work, being you. We understand this is about a very, very personal subject. It's about where you want to live. It's about your daily activities. It's about your family. It's about your desire. It's not about anybody else's. This is a point where you get to live life as you want. Your financials will have something to do with it, right? But this is a very, very important of the next stage, or a further stage, or a stage that you maybe won't have the abilities to make the choice on, but you can make them now, or you can at least give your desires now. So hopefully this is helpful, but we understand this is a really important part of life, the financial support, all of this. And that's what we're here for the financial side. We want to at least explore the questions that are bigger than finances. And that is, what wouldn't you trade for more money? That's a big part of what it is we do. And a lot of people, it's religion, experiences, their family, their help, their reputation. So those are big, big, big ones for clients as well. So how can we continue to help you with those? With that, I know we've run some time today. Are there any last questions? I think we probably got maybe 4 or 5 minutes left. I don't see any here. I see a lot of head shaking. So I assume, how about this? If it was one of the best programs you've ever seen in your life and well worth your time, say nothing whatsoever. Perfect. Wow, this was definitely, we're going to give this 100 out of 100 then. That was outstanding. But thank you for the data that you've given us, the questions you've given us, some of the different, and if there's questions along the way, this isn't your only chance to ask them. We'd like you. We're going to send a couple pieces out that are going to allow you to follow up with some questions you may have personally, just about your situation or in general. So we'll provide you again we're building this team of experts outside of here that we've got some access to, and we could use, and maybe bringing 1 or 2 of them on, like a client came on with the very first one. Hey, I'm exploring this, and he's been exploring that for 5 or 7 years. He's done a ton of due diligence, made the choice, made the move, and what has his experience been? It's what he'd hoped for. He may not be in our price range. Is it in our price range? Those are the kind of questions we can answer. So with that, thank you so much for your time. The most valuable asset you have, and we all have, is our time and how we spend it. So if we can make this valuable for you and help you enhance your life in these decisions, and more importantly, eliminate some anxiety from the complexity of this world, this may be something that's sitting out there taking up energy, but once the decision is made, it may push it to the side and go, okay, cool. I'd love to stay in my house, or I'd love to X, Y, or Z. So I just want to make sure that you guys understand we're here for you. We've got a team built for you. Others this is one of the biggest things we have too. As our community grows, as you're introducing people, and thank you so much for doing so, that are interesting, that share, that we can help, that are really great people as well, and we can really get behind and encourage in their retirement or their journey, they become resources for you. So don't depreciate your own resource to somebody else. Hey, we're struggling with this. We're doing all this here. You're not the only one. There's a lot of us out there with those same questions. So let's talk about those. Let's use this community as a community that you can share with, you can build with, you can gain from, because that's probably one of the biggest things I have found, is being in this community of who you guys are is beneficial to all the lives of my team here. We learn a ton from you. We appreciate you coming in and sharing. We're there in many cases, for funerals and things that we didn't know all the incredible things about you guys. but we love that. We appreciate you letting us in and you letting us help you. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time today. We'll let you guys go here from this beautiful autumn day, probably the third or fourth day of autumn here in Milwaukee anyway. Ashley has something on here as well. We'll have the series that'll kick off here. We're going to probably give you a few teasers along the way as we gain more information. If it's more important to you in the shorter term, let us know too. But we'll continue to email us with these questions, email us with things going on, and tech. These are the things that we want to know. We want to know as we find more information on this, or if this isn't so interesting, the Del Web communities are this. We can get some of these things or links to them or experts on these categories. We also have a client who's an expert in the senior living category, which we might bring into the next panel too, and have them be one of our panelists rather than just Chris, going on forever and ever. But I do appreciate the questions we've had. Thank you so much for this day and the time you've given us. And with that, as Ashley has it on the screen here, up next, we're going to be looking toward the spring, towards having some wonderful, wonderful arranged guided visits, some keynote speakers, some panelists. We know that when you guys get toward the holidays, it gets very bunched up, and many of you also go south to get away from some of the weather. But as we get to the spring here, we should have some great data and some in-depth information on some of the questions you've had today. And we'll start working them immediately after this as well. All right, with that, I thank you all, and you have a great rest of your Wednesday.